a South Africa in which those who commit crime and corruption are not profiled according to nationality, but are dealt with as criminals by the agencies of the state mandated to deal with that area. It cannot be the responsibility of vigilantes. It cannot be the responsibility of anybody taking the law into their own hands.
Welcome back to the show. That was South African Minister of Home Affairs telling citizens not to take the law into their own hands. Let's get back to our panel right now. Let's go to Rodney in Pretoria. Rodney, we just heard that from the South African Home Affairs Minister. What is the South African government doing about this? You mentioned at the beginning of the show that there are some talks going on. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, sometimes you are not too sure whether the statements that are made by government are not for political expediency. You do know that the Johannesburg and Tshwane are now controlled by the Democratic Alliance, who is actually in the opposition benches in Parliament. But I do want to concede that it is the responsibility of the collective, that is all the stakeholders, government and communities on the ground, to make sure that this thing is nipped in the bud.
And Kayode, you mentioned a role for the African Union. What can the African Union do at this stage with this rise in the number of attacks against foreigners?
The first thing that needs to be done is that the African Union must translate its so-called collaboration, government-to-government collaboration, and just sort of get that down to the bottom. Right now, it's just people saying things, leaders saying we want a union, we want a cooperation, we want visa-free amongst African states, but not enough is being done within the continent to actually expose citizens to the oneness of the African continent. You have this, especially, let me get back to say maybe in South Africa, politicians, so not all politicians, but a lot of politicians, like it is in Europe, take advantage of the inequalities to actually expand their own standing in society and get elected into office. And when they get into office, it's too late when they are trying to become statesmen. When they issue releases, press releases saying that they stand against xenophobic attacks, the followers will not be able to respect that. So the African Union needs to make economic cooperation easy among small businesses within the continent, not just multinationals being able to access the economy of other nations. There's nothing wrong in a small-scale enterprise in South Africa being able to access Nigerian markets vis-a-vis Nigerian or Ghanaian small-scale enterprise being able to easily access markets in South Africa or any other parts of the continent. There's too much emphasis placed on giving advantage to the big players rather than empowering the small business owners and the so-called ordinary people of Africa.
Nii, on that point, you know, there are large numbers of people from other African countries moving to South Africa, from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Congo, Nigeria, even Somalia. They move long distances to get to South Africa. Have any attempts been made by this? A lot of them just walk across the border, of course, you know. But have any attempts been made by the South African government to normalize their situation, to grant them the necessary residence and work permits so they can live legally in the country and work legally in the country?
My educated guess is that, yes, some efforts have been made. I'm pretty sure that the government, if you put this question to them, will show you measures that they have been taking. But the crucial issue is that enough? Is it having an impact? And clearly not. So they actually do need to do more. I think what my two brothers have said, I want to stress that it seems to me that you have to tackle the problem from both ends. One is public education in the communities where these, what we have to call vigilantism is taking place. The communities must know that it is never right to take the law into your own hands. That's a recipe for chaos. That's one part of it, but the other part of it is that these communities, their legitimate grievances must be met. If there are no jobs, if they have other grievances, those must be met, because Public education alone, if a person doesn't have a job and there's crime in their streets, no amount of public education will persuade them. So you have to do both. So you have to look at what is happening in the community. But I also think that the politicians need to do a better job, as have been stressed. Politicians everywhere try to use these things for advantage, and then they turn their backs. I do think the other thing, especially given the what Kayode said about the Africa Union, you know, if you look, we are focusing on South Africa now. But actually, the majority of young Africans who leave their countries to look for jobs elsewhere head towards Europe. They head to other African countries. So this is not, I mean, the killing at this scale of migrants is, yes, exceptional in South Africa, and it gets attention. But the underlying problem, which is that African economies are not growing enough, or even if they are growing fast, it doesn't trickle down to poor young people. So there is this massive phenomenon of young Africans leaving their countries to go to look for work. A lot of them are trapped in Libya, trying to get into Europe. You get monthly reports of them drowning in the Mediterranean. That is a serious issue, and I know that African leaders have said we need to do a better job so that our young people don't feel compelled to believe in and going to other places in ways in which are terrible. The new president of Ghana, this was part of his inaugural speech. I know even Nigeria, there are young Nigerians who live for other places. So other African countries also, apart from putting pressure on South Africa and the African Union talking and trying to find a solution, internal growth that benefits poor communities all over Africa are also very important, so young people don't feel compelled to set out on dangerous journeys into countries that don't welcome them and that treats them badly. Yeah. And I think the situation of Europe is, to me, is particularly horrendous, because European countries went into Africa, colonized the continent, raped the continent, took the wealth, and now that relatively small numbers are running away from wars and poverty, the Europeans say, we don't want you. But for centuries, they went in and ruled those countries. So I have very little sympathy for the European leaders who are crying and saying, we don't want immigrants here.
Yeah. Rodney, you know, there was a report produced by a group called Migrating for Work, based at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and they found that foreign migrants were more likely to be employed, but also more likely to have poor working conditions and to occupy positions in jobs that South Africans would not take. This has also led to another very insidious development, and that is foreign workers in South Africa are being exploited and they're being subject to violence. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's correct. One of the contestations that you find between blacks and some of our brothers and sisters is precisely because of the exploitation element that is there. So if you have employers who allow people from other parts of the country to do jobs and not to complain about work conditions, not to complain about how they're compensated, you're bound to have problems. The bigger problem for me is a system that has not dealt with the issues of the economy. You will remember that for us to have this South Africa that we have, there was a negotiated settlement that we had agreed to. And quite clearly, it seems to me that we have been outsmarted in that those who thought that we would have political power at the same time thought we will have economic power, only to realize that the two are not easily united. So you have the constitution, or we have a constitutional democracy, which in a way makes it very difficult to accelerate, you know, the economic transformation, and also to make sure that the land is in fact returned to its rightful owners. So instead of really having these things happening, you have people caught rescinding decisions that government has made in an effect of trying to really transform the economy. So you find yourself between a rock and a hard place, because not enough is happening, because those who have the means can go to the courts and make sure that things stay as they used to.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us.